Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are in day 2 of the hearing in docket number 2022-188-EC, which is Spectrum Southeast Complaint versus York Electric Cooperative. We are in the process, we have Mr. Basha on the stand, is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor, and you're coming in very soft.
Ah, thank you.
Uh,
Appreciate you telling me that.
and
Hang on a
Madam
second.
Chair,
I'm getting something from the back. Roll call. Oh, thank you. Roll call. It takes a village to keep me straight. Yeah, I got that. Let's take roll call of commissioners. We have Commissioner Urban virtually present in the hearing room. We have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder, everybody. And Mr. Willoughby.
Madam Chair, as you consider your order of cross-examination, we would ask respectfully to be the last party to cross-examine. I think that's customary in many cases, certainly in rate cases it is, and we would ask for that privilege here this morning as well.
Well, let's look at the regulation, Mr. Willoughby.
And I would note to further add to that, Your Honor, there does appear to be some alliance, if you will, between the Telephone Coalition and the co-op. So it would.
Mr. Willoughby, I'm looking at Regulation 103.842, and in a complaint, evidence will ordinarily be received in the following order: complainants, respondents, other parties, ORS. So for when it's the respondent's turn, we will go back up and do complainants, other parties, and ORS. Let's keep it that way. I appreciate your request, though. Good morning, Mr. Basha. You're still under oath, sir?
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, I am.
And I think we finished yesterday with the direct. We did. And so we will proceed with the cross and look to Spectrum.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll make my way over here.
Good morning. Doing well, sir.
Could I get you to turn that microphone on, please? There you go, it's on.
Is it on now? All right. Good morning, Mr. Basha.
Good morning.
My name is Paul Werner. I represent Spectrum, or Charter, in this proceeding. I'm going to ask you a few questions today.
Okay.
As a preliminary matter, I see that you're a man who likes fancy socks, and I do as well. So kudos to you on that.
They're given to me by as gifts, but they do make people smile.
Mr. Basha, in your testimony, you addressed York's asserted justifications for its 84-inch neutral conductor clearance and 18-foot midspan clearance requirement. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to discuss those with you this morning. Now, in your view, as I understand it, York may require attachers to attach at 84 inches below the neutral in order to accommodate York's membership growth. Is that right?
That's part of it, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in your testimony, in the testimony that you submitted directly yesterday, you did not include or list off any specific development plans. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you didn't note also any specific project showing a need for space within the 84 inches on any specific pole. Is that right?
That's correct. It happens sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis.
Okay. And the idea, just so we're all on the same page, the concept is that York is really projecting anticipated needs down the road, anticipated growth based on development in its service territory. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, it's basically based on the anticipated customers that York doesn't have, but it anticipates will be coming online down the road. Is that fair?
That's correct. We've been historically the fastest growing or the second fastest growing co-op in the state for, I guess, the last 20 years.
And that's because areas within your service territory are moving from rural to urban. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. But as of late, we've seen more move into the rural areas. It's kind of been a change.
Okay. Well, part of COVID. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you state that York's 84-inch clearance requirement is to minimize upgrade and make-ready work that would come with the anticipated growth we were just talking about, right?
That's part of it. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the idea, again, is that if you're reserving space already on the pole to accommodate transformers and other supply lines, that will minimize make-ready from York or other attachers when you actually need to expand service to accommodate a new customer. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you understand as well that by reserving that space, it means that there's less room for communications attachers to use usable space on the pole, right?
Yes, sir.
And as a result, it would mean that attachers in many cases will need to replace 35-foot poles in York system in order to accommodate their attachments, right?
That's correct, but predominantly our poles are 40-foot standard and not 35. We have some 35 left in legacy part of our system, but that's correct.
Well, you're anticipating my next couple questions. So York has 40-foot poles and 35-foot poles, is that right?
We have them up to 90-foot, yes, sir.
Okay.
But predominantly a primary pole is going to be a 40 or 45-foot pole.
Okay. And for the 35-foot poles, do you have a ballpark percentage of the number of those poles within York system?
I do not, off the top of my head. I can get that for you, but every day it gets less because when we change a pole out, we go to a taller pole automatically, irregardless of other things that are attached to it.
And what size pole are you substituting the 35-foot poles for?
A 40-foot.
Okay. And the 40-foot poles, too, in many instances, would need to be replaced to accommodate a communications attachment in light of the 84-inch rule, right?
Could be, but by going to a 40-foot, it's less likely many of those poles have to be changed out. But yes, depending on terrain, grade, there could be some, yes, sir.
Okay, and you would agree with me that if you combine the 84-inch rule with the 18-foot midspan clearance, you're further compressing the amount of usable space that's available for communications attachments, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. That's because to attain an 18-foot midspan clearance, a communications attacher needs to attach at about 20 and a half feet. Is that right?
Depending on terrain, but yes, that's a fair estimate.
So, okay. So, for example, if you had just on a given 35-foot pole, if you had a neutral at 25.7 feet, an attachment at 25 and a half feet, that means that you've got 62 inches remaining of complete separation of usable space in the pole, right?
I hadn't done the math in my head, but can I just take you at your word?
Except subject to check, is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a mathematician either, so I totally hear you on that. That's why I went to law school. But that would make, if you had 62 inches, right, you're not going to be able to make a communications attachment because you're not going to be able to accommodate the 84. Fair enough?
If everything what you said is correct, I agree.
Okay. All right. Now, you also state that the 84-inch clearance requirement is intended to reduce safety hazards. Is that true?
That's correct.
All right. And you also offer safety hazards and the purpose of reducing them as a basis for the 18-foot midspan clearance requirement as well, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you're familiar, of course, with Charter's pole attachment agreement with York, right?
I am.
Okay.
I haven't, that was many years ago, but yes, I have it in our information here.
Fair enough, right? You attach it to your own testimony, correct? Okay, and it's Exhibit 14 to your testimony. And you would agree with me that have you reviewed that pole attachment agreement closely in connection with this case?
I've gone back over it, not every word, but have gone back over it to refresh my memory somewhat.
Okay, well, we can look at some specific provisions, but I just want to call some out to you. My guess is you're going to be familiar with them, and we don't need to look at the agreement. But if so, please let me know, and we'll pull it up.
Okay.
So you would generally agree with me, though, that York includes within that agreement a number of ways for it to ensure that Charter's attachments are safe and compliant with the NESC, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. And one of those is York performs the make-ready, right?
Upon when y'all apply for attachment, and if it's determined we have to do make-ready work, yes.
Yeah, and so that means that York goes out and determines what needs to be done to accommodate charter's attachment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and accommodate in the sense of complying with York's requirements to ensure that it's compliant with the NESC as well as to prevent any safety hazards, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And you would agree with me that the intent of a make-ready survey under the agreement is to determine if the existing pole line is ready to receive the additional attachment of the licensee's facilities, the charter's facilities, right?
I believe that's fair.
Okay. And the survey, of course, is performed by York or its consulting engineer, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And charter pays for that survey, right?
Yes, sir. We do send them a bill for that survey.
Okay. And charter pays it, right?
Sometimes.
Okay. Well, you don't document in your testimony any instances where charter failed to pay a make-ready survey, right?
I do not recall have those in there.
Okay. All right. And York also has the right to inspect each new charter attachment, right?
Yeah, I think the contract says we have the right to, but we're not obligated to.
Right. You can opt not to, right?
Right.
Okay. And if York does, in fact, opt to inspect a charter attachment, charter pays for that, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you would agree with me as well that in emergency situations, to correct clearance problems, York reserves the right to do anything necessary within good utility practice to maintain correct clearances, right?
Yes, we've had to do it before. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and if it goes out and has to perform any kind of emergency work, that's again something that charter pays for, right?
Again, sir, we have invoiced and sometimes pay, sometimes not.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about the one instance that you mentioned in your testimony, but just generally, under the contract,
That's correct.
charter is obligated to pay for that emergency work. Right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you would agree with me that through the pull application process as well as the survey process, York knows where charter is going to be making an attachment, right? And how?
Yes, sir. There have been some attachments we found where they have not come to us, and we find them later because by the contract, we're allowed to inspect every 3 years. And so we found some that were attached and have made a charter at that time, and other companies aware that there's an attachment that has not been applied for.
Okay. And I just want to focus you in on charter, not other communications providers. And just to
I'm
be
just trying to be
clear-
fair to all companies.
Sure, and I appreciate that. But just to be clear, the notion of unauthorized attachments, that's not something you address in your direct testimony, is it?
No, it is not.
Okay, all right. And you'd agree with me that generally, in connection with charter's pull attachment applications, York performs any engineering analysis it believes is necessary to ensure the integrity of its system, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And York can, if it chooses to, insist on charter's compliance with its contractual obligations under the pull attachment agreement, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Now, you reference in your direct testimony the training that communications contractors receive, and your point is that the training that they get is inadequate, right?
That is our perception.
Right. It's a perception, but you would agree with me that your perception isn't based on any firsthand knowledge that you actually have with respect to the training of third-party contractors that charter uses to make its attachments, right?
That's correct. We're only looking at the results.
Right. And you actually don't reference any charter-specific training or training requirements in your
I
testimony.
do not. I have no knowledge of their training.
Right, exactly. And so you don't know as well what certifications charter requires of its contractors, right?
I do not.
Okay. And you'd agree with me that you also don't know what contract obligations charter holds its contractors to?
No, we're not privy to that.
All right. I want to show you a document here. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a cross-examination exhibit. And Madam Reporter, if I get this marked. Mind if I approach?
Will be marked as hearing exhibit 5
And how would you like me to distribute a copy?
to councils first, the court reporter, council, then commissioners.
Thank you.
like, Madam Chair, since it's a new exhibit, I'll hand up to your council, and I think we've got enough here.
I was gonna go ahead and put this on the Elmo.
Okay, both ways.
That works. Mr. Basher, have you had a chance to take a look at this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, have you seen this before?
This is some information I believe is on our corporate website.
Right. This is some marketing information that
Yes,
York has on its company site, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I want to direct you to the picture here on the front page.
Yes, sir.
Now, you would agree with me that York also uses third-party contractors to attach fiber to its poles, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you see here the pole worker and the bucket truck working on the pole?
I do. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you can see that he's in a short sleeve shirt, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you agree with me, he's not wearing any arc flash protective gear?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you wouldn't use a photo like this in your own company's marketing if you thought it displayed unsafe working conditions, would you?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you consult with Mr. Booth before you used this photo in a marketing piece?
No, sir.
Okay.
If
How
I'm-
about-
May I explain what the photo is?
Sure.
Okay. This photo was taken right when we began our fiber project, and we were basically, I'll just be honest, it was a marketing picture that was set up to show that we were starting to do fiber. So there's no, the gentleman where he's at is well below any energized conductor. I think he's near where the communication anchor guy wire attaches, but it was a photo set up to show that we were getting started with fiber, showing different trucks out there, that kind of thing.
So would you agree with me that he's in the communications worker safety zone?
He's probably below it,
Okay.
but I don't know the height of the pole and couldn't speak, but that was a marketing picture set up to get something on the website to announce to our members that we had just started doing fiber. And I think I know about when that time was. It was in May of the year.
Okay, it looks like this was dated as of October 2021, is that right? Is that
I'm not
refresh your
sure.
recollection of the timing?
The co-op began their fiber project in May, as far as installing the fiber. So I guess that would be could be May of 21, but I do not recall. I know that when that picture was taken.
Okay. Now, this seems to indicate that it's Fiber Optic Solutions is the fiber installation company, is that right?
They're one of our contractors, yes,
Okay. And they're based in North Carolina, is that right?
sir. I believe so.
Okay. And they're communications installers?
They do communication and they specialize in putting fiber into electric space.
Okay. All right. All right. I want to direct your attention back to contractual issues, and you talk a bit in your testimony about compliance
Yes,
by
sir.
communications companies with their contractual obligations. You'd agree with me that the parties' pole attachment agreement here between Charter's predecessor, and York contains provisions that allow York to enforce its contract?
It does allow those, yes.
Sure. So if Charter fails to comply with the terms of the agreement and also fails to cure any default within 30 days of written notice from York, York can actually terminate the agreement, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Or, alternatively, York can terminate the permit covering the pole where there's a compliance issue, right?
I believe that's what our contractual rights.
Okay. In York, we discussed this a bit ago, but York can also elect to do any necessary work at Charter's expense, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And of course, we discussed this a bit ago, but just to reiterate, the agreement also allows York to conduct pre- and post-construction surveys all at Charter's expense, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And of course, if York performs the surveys, pre and post, York can, of course, discover whether there's a safety violation on any given pole, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, you'd agree with me that in your testimony, you don't include any evidence of any mid-span clearance violations by Charter, right?
I do not in my testimony.
Okay. And in fact, you don't provide any pictures or other proof of charter violating York's vertical clearance requirements at all, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you also don't point, we talked about this, but just to lock it in, you don't point to any instances where charter failed to pay a make-ready invoice, right?
I've been out of the engineering role for almost 20 years, so I do not have any personal knowledge of dealing with our folks that handle that, deal with those invoicing, and I don't deal with those anymore, so I did not include that in my testimony.
Sure, but you're the president of the company. If you
That's
wanted
correct.
that information to put in your testimony, it certainly would have been available to you, right?
Yes, sir.
And you reference in your testimony an instance where a vehicle snagged on a communications line that was too low. Do you recall that testimony?
I do, yes, sir.
All right. Now, you agree with me that generally the telephone company, not the cable company, is the lowest line on the pole?
I've seen it both ways, but I'll agree with what you're saying. I'm not sure what the code is on which goes where, but I've seen it both ways.
Okay. Now, in your testimony, you don't actually identify the communications attacher at fault, right?
I did not.
Okay. And most specifically, you don't submit any evidence or any documentation with your testimony about the details of that incident, right?
I did not. That was many years ago. I know about where it was and about what happened, but I did not give you any pictures or anything.
Well, what I'm getting at is there's no evidence or report or documentation around the height of the communications line that was snagged, right?
There's no documentation in my testimony.
And there's no documentation around the height of the vehicle that snagged the line, right?
No, it was a dump truck. The bed was down, but it was a dump truck. But I don't recall any more than that.
Okay, so that's your recollection. But again, there's no document, no report, no evidence showing that the dump truck had its bed down or not,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right.
And it's a common occurrence, isn't it, for dump trucks to blow through areas with their beds up and snag lines?
It has happened before.
Okay. Now, in your testimony, you do talk about an instance where Charter failed to pay an inspection invoice, right? That was the Bent Creek issue.
Bent Creek was, I believe, a damage to where a contractor dug up our facilities and damaged a transformer and wire and caused an outage to a good number of members.
Okay, you're right. You actually don't identify any instances where Charter failed to pay an inspection invoice, correct?
I did not have it in my
Okay.
testimony.
All right, so in your rebuttal testimony, you reference a dispute between York and Charter regarding damage in the Bent Creek subdivision, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and again, you don't actually submit any evidence with your testimony showing that Charter or its contractor were actually at fault in that instance, right?
No, I think if I recall, we have the invoice, we have the letter, but we don't have any evidence, picture evidence in my testimony.
Okay, now, Mr. Basha, you understand that Charter and its contractor disputed their responsibility for that damage, right?
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, and there was actually some written exchanges about that, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I wasn't party to them, but I believe there was some.
Okay. Well, I'd like to show you one now,
Okay.
and I'm going to. Well, before I move on, let me ask that we move in the prior exhibit into the record at this time. I forget now what number it was.
Exhibit 5.
All right. I'd like to move Exhibit 5 into the record.
No objection, Madam Chair.
Exhibit 5 will be received into evidence.
All right. Now, I'd like to mark another cross-examination exhibit, which I guess will be Exhibit 6. And I'll hand this out.
Thank you.
Basher, have you had a chance to take a look at this?
I have begun to, yes, sir.
Okay, just let me know when you're ready.
Okay, I flipped through it, yes, sir.
Okay, I want to direct your attention, I've got it on the Elmo here, so hopefully it's on the screen, to page 3. And you'll agree with me that these are email exchanges among Charter, York, and Metrotech Systems discussing the Bent Creek damage?
It appears that way, sir.
Okay. Have you seen this email before?
No, sir.
Was it brought to your attention in connection with your direct testimony and rebuttal testimony in this proceeding?
No, I've not seen it before.
Okay. Well, if you look at page 3, Metrotech is responding to an email from York, right?
Let's see. Yes, Mary Docus looks like she works for Metrotech, and she's responding to Miss Hambright, who is employee of York Electric.
Okay. And what she says is the information you supplied Spectrum is not accurate, right?
That's what she says, yes, sir.
And she goes on to say that you and I spoke a year ago about this damage. Metrotech worked well within the scope of our locate tickets. The locate company that has the contract for York Electric refused to mark any laterals, therefore resulting in the damage. You see that?
I do see that.
Okay. And Metrotech says that neither it nor Charter is responsible for the damage, right?
That's what it says, sir.
And what she says is that USIC is a responsible party, right?
Right, that's the locating service.
I was just going to ask you that. That's the locator, right?
Mhm.
Okay, all right. And Mantech also offered to have a site meeting a year ago, and that offer was declined, right?
That's what it says. I don't have knowledge of meeting requests or anything being declined.
Okay. Well, let's go to, if you look over to the next page, you can see that Monica Hambright from York writes back and says, "Thank you for your response," right?
Are you on
It would be page 2.
page 2, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for your response. Yes, sir,
Yeah.
I see that.
And then if you look at page 1, you can see the down below, Mary Dukas writes that the site visit was denied by Monica Hambright.
That's what it says.
Okay. And you agree with me that York refused to process any Charter's permit applications until Charter paid this disputed invoice, right?
Yes, we have a letter to that effect.
Yeah. Now, do you know if Charter paid the invoice just so that York wouldn't hold up its bills in unserved portions of York's territory?
I can't really speak to the reason for paying it, but it does appear to be the case.
All right. And you'd agree with me that this is not an example where Charter simply refused to pay some undisputed charges, right?
From our perspective, and the gentleman who went out there in the field and saw the wire damage, and that the Charter, Spectrum, whatever facilities were right into where the wires were cut and pulled, they determined that was the case. So
But Charter disputed that conclusion.
they did
correct?
dispute that.
Okay.
Mhm.
So again, this example, this billing, this is a disputed charge, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Basher, you're familiar with the Broadband Accessibility Act that we've been calling it the BAA, right?
A little bit. I've not near the knowledge you have of it, but I know a little bit about it.
Well, I was told yesterday that other people in the room here have more knowledge of it than me, so.
I'm underneath you, sir.
All right, well, I want to ask you a few questions about it anyway. And if you don't know, you can just say you don't know. But for your benefit and for mine, I'm going to put a copy of section 58.9.30.30, which is one we've all been focused on here. And I want to focus you on section A. Okay? Now, just as a general matter, you'd agree with me, sir, that the BAA did not exist when Charter's predecessor entered its earlier pole attachment agreement with York, right?
That's correct.
All right. So back then, you'd agree with me that a communications attacher had no right at all to attach to York's poles, correct?
I can't tell you what the rules were back then, but we were glad to work with any company that came in the door wanting to attach because, we saw it as a means of helping our members.
Okay. But you don't know one way or the other
No.
whether a communications a company actually had a right, a mandated right to access York's poles?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, in any event, have you had a chance to look at 58-9-3030 in your work for York?
No, I can't say I have. And if you want to read me something, I'll be glad to comment. But
Sure, I will. You recall that your council, Mr. Ellaby, talked about conduits being part of this section yesterday, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I just want to make sure we have a clear understanding of what kind of conduits we're talking about. There are conduits that are risers that go up a pole to protect and shield wires within them, correct?
Right. And that was on a drawing we submitted.
Right. But there are also conduits that go underground to accommodate underground construction as
yes,
opposed
sir.
to aerial, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So the conduits that are being referenced here could either be, or both, the riser type, but also conduits that are used to distribute electricity or communications underground, right?
Again, I've not read that particular part of the BAA that I can tell you, but yes, you're correct about conduits can be underground or on a pole.
Yeah, well, let's just step away from the statute for a second. Conduits, as used by electric companies and communications companies, can either be the riser type or they can be ways to distribute power or communications underground, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, does York have the underground conduits?
We put underground conduits in, yes, sir.
Now, do you have a good understanding of the percentage between aerial and underground electric distribution that York engages in?
Mhm.
Okay.
Probably just over half our facilities are underground currently.
Okay.
That counts secondary, service wire, and primary.
Okay. Now, the underground conduits, are those in the more developed areas of York's system as opposed to its rural areas?
As a rule, yes, but a lot of rural areas have those into. It's a system integrity thing that we run from a pole out in the country to a house. We put that wire in a conduit to protect it from damage and moisture and that sort of thing.
Okay, but as a general matter, the conduits are used in more urban areas. Is that
As a
fair?
general rule.
Okay. Okay, let's take a look at this subsection A of the statute. And do you recall your council's arguments in opening that the section having to do with the NESC only applied to conduits because it happens to be set off by commas? Do you recall that?
I remember that discussion.
Okay. Now, if you took out that section, or you set it off, it would read, access includes the right to non-discriminatory use of all easements and rights of way and to all poles and similar support structures owned or controlled by the electric cooperative. Are you with me? And
Somewhat.
of course it goes on.
Yeah, somewhat,
Right.
sir. Yes, sir.
But the idea being presented yesterday is that the to the extent not prohibited language only applies to conduits. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. So if you took out that language as it related to poles and other support structures, York would have, a charter would have an unqualified right to attach to York's poles, right?
I can't see it from here, and I'm just taking your word for what you're saying, but that makes some sense.
Mr.
Right.
Basha, can
Oh,
you read
thank you.
this?
Thank you very much.
It's just behind you, sorry.
Conduits. So yes.
Madam Chair, I'm going to interpose an objection to asking this witness a legal interpretation, statutory construction question that's beyond the scope of his expertise or his testimony in this case.
Understand the objection. He can always say, I don't know, but he's in an area where they're working with this, but I think we understand that he's not an attorney and
Well, and I think that argue with you, but just to explain my objection. I did not object and do not object to him talking about conduits and how they're used in York's business. But I think council is now getting to the point of asking him to draw legal conclusions. What would happen if you remove that language? What would be the effect legally on how we would interpret other provisions of the statute? And that's crossing a line into an area that I think
That is asking for a
inappropriate.
legal opinion. Let's see where we're going with this.
Yeah, just to clarify that, I wanted to set that up, but I actually just have a practical question for him. And so let me just ask you this.
Okay.
Would York be comfortable, or would it allow a communications attacher to attach whether or not its attachments complied with the NESC?
Can you restate that, please?
Yeah, would York be okay with with Charter or other attachers making attachments even if they didn't comply with the NESC?
We would not want someone attached to something in an unsafe manner. So if they were to, because of concern of safety, so I would say we would not want them attached in not in compliance.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna move on from that. Thank you. Now, let me ask you this. There's been a lot of discussion around this, and in your summary yesterday, you also talked about it. York has a broadband partner called Comporium, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Comporium uses cables attached to York's poles to provide communication services, correct?
Yes, those are our fiber connections on the pole, but they do transmit through those.
Sure. And the services Comporium provides are like the services that Charter provides, right?
I believe so.
Okay. But York does not require Comporium's attachments to be 84 inches below the neutral, right?
We require all Comporium attachments to be 84 inches below neutral. What was pictured, though, is York Electric attachments. Those are not Comporium fibers.
So you're saying they're they're for Comporium's use, but they were made by York. Is that fair?
They're installed, designed, and built by York, so they're owned by us.
Okay. Well,
We have all the bills to prove it. It's a lot of money.
we're gonna get to that in a minute, but just bear with me for a minute. Now, you've reviewed pictures from Mr. Lupino, correct?
I have skimmed through them, yes, sir.
Okay. And you've seen instances where the midspan clearances are not at 18 feet, right?
I believe, sir, that we found there was two he mentioned. One of them was actually already caught by our people and it was drawn up to change the pole out, and that pole's been changed. There was one that I believe that we did not catch, but we appreciate him finding it, and that pole's been changed out too because
Right.
it needed to be done.
But at the time the pictures were taken, you'd agree with me that the SAG did not meet the 18-foot.
Yeah, it was I believe so many inches off from being 18 feet. You're
Yeah, there
correct.
was one that didn't even meet 15.5, right?
I don't recall.
Okay. But you'd agree with me that it's not just Charter or communications companies that can have issues with clearance at times, right?
Oh yeah, I agree.
And the pictures show that even York at times can have trouble with making the right clearance, right?
I guess the difference is once we found it, we immediately wanted to correct it, and so when we're doing our inspections, the one that was already drawn up to be changed, our folks caught in that process, but they didn't catch the other one. Correct.
Right, so York can put in work orders and have clearance violations corrected, correct?
Correct.
Right. And so York, and on behalf of Comporium, it can fix clearance issues through work order even when an initial installation wasn't to spec. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. And you'd agree with me that Charter can fix clearance issues as well through work orders, right?
They could.
Okay. And in fact, you'd agree with me, we talked about this earlier, but Charter's actually contractually required to make those kinds of corrections.
They are required.
Yeah. And you'd agree with me that clearance issues, separation issues, those are the types of maintenance type issues that are discovered during normal ride-outs and audits, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Now, I want to focus in. You talked about this yesterday in your summary, so I want to talk to you about it. specifically York's agreement with Comporium. You're familiar with that, aren't you?
I am.
Okay. Now, there were some emails between York's counsel and Charter's counsel that identify the terms of that arrangement, right, at a high level.
Right, I think there's a summary included.
It's a summary.
Mhm.
You agree with me that no one in this proceeding has actually seen the network agreement between York and Comporium, right?
As far as from Spectrum, you're saying,
I
when you
mean,
say
it's-
proceedings, that,
No one has submitted it in connection with this
that's correct.
proceeding.
Mhm.
So none of the parties have had access to what that agreement actually says.
That's correct.
The only thing that we have to talk about is the summary from York's counsel, Mr. McDonald, right?
Madam Chair, I just want to note for the record, we're objecting to any discussion about the agreement between York and Comporium. That matter is not properly before the commission.
Mr. Basha discussed this in his summary yesterday, so I think it's fair game.
Let's see where we're going with this and maintain it within the confines that we've got in the record, please.
I'm just going to pull up that email for you, Mr. Basha, so you can look at it if you need to.
Okay.
And I'm just going to ask you some questions about it. This is actually your Exhibit 12. It's in your own testimony. So let's take a look at it.
Okay.
Now, you agree with me, this isn't the Comporium agreement, right?
No, this is a summary.
This is an email, right?
It's an email.
Okay. So we're not talking about the Comporium agreement. We're talking about what's been represented about the Comporium agreement in an email in this proceeding, right?
That's correct. This email has to do with the Comporium agreement, but it's not the agreement.
All right. Now, it says, if you look at the third bullet, it says that York's going to construct middle mile transport fiber infrastructure, or MMF, for serving customers. Is that right?
Oh, that's correct.
Okay, and in return, Comporium receives an exclusive license to use the remainder of the middle mile transport fiber infrastructure for serving customers. Is that right?
That's what it says. Yes, sir.
Okay, and then it says that Comporium's going to serve as the sole administrative agent for any unused fiber, and the parties will share the revenues for any fiber leased to third parties. Is that right?
That's what it says. Yes, sir.
Okay, and it says as well that Comporium is solely responsible for operating and maintaining its facilities that are interconnected to the MMF, right?
That's correct.
Okay, now, what facilities are those?
I believe this is referencing what they call little electronic cabinets that boost the signal. I do electricity, I don't do fiber, and I apologize if I'm using the wrong terminology. But there are some cabinets that the fiber comes in and goes out of that Comporium refers to them as electronics.
All right, are they on the pole?
I believe most of them are mounted on the ground.
On the ground pedestals?
I believe so.
Okay. Now, it says as well that Comporium paid York a contribution in aid of construction of the MMF, right?
It does say that.
And it says that Comporium's going to pay York a portion of its retail revenues from customers served by the MMF during the term, plus a specified hurdle rate.
That's what it says. Yes, sir.
Now, okay, and it also says that York, after York recoups its money for building the fiber, York is going to transfer the MMF title to Comporium, right?
If we ever get to that point, yes, sir.
Okay, well, it's expected you're going to get to that point, right? That's the whole reason for the enterprise, right?
Well, the whole reason of the enterprise is to take care of the members who didn't have service. That's our whole motive for getting into it, because it's not a profitable venture. Trust me.
But but the point is for York to make its money back, right?
We would love to eventually. Yes, sir.
All right. And if and when that happens, then the fiber gets transferred
To Comporium.
Right? Okay. So if and when that happens, that fiber, now owned by Comporium, is going to sit at a place on the pole that York will not let Charter occupy, right?
It could turn out that way.
Yeah. And so if and when that happens, after Comporium takes ownership, it's going to be a third-party communications attacher with the same, or essentially the same, pole attachment agreement as Charter, right?
Somewhat different in that Comporium could not operate that fiber in that space. And what we would do is we would work, so if there was an issue and our personnel who are trained to work in electric space would lower that fiber down off the pole, let Comporium work on it, and reattach it back up because their employees are not trained to work in the electric space.
So that's after Comporium takes title to it?
That would be something that would be addressed later down the road and 20 years from now.
Is
Whatever.
there an agreement around that?
This is understanding.
So, no, there's not an agreement?
There's not a written agreement that I'm aware of, but that was the anticipated in the discussions that we understood that they could not work in the electric space.
Okay, but there's no agreement that says that, right?
I do not know there is one. Don't remember all the agreements, but best of my knowledge that was not a written agreement about that at this point.
Okay, well, you'd agree with me, of course, that as things stand today, York and Comporium, or Rock Hill Telephone Company, have, and I think this is represented in your testimony, essentially the same pole attachment agreement as Charter, right?
That's correct.
Okay, right. And that continues in force, correct?
That's correct.
So the agreements between Comporium and York as of today are a pole attachment agreement, which is actually styled a joint use agreement between Rock Hill and York, right?
Mhm.
And then the network agreement that none of us has seen, right?
I believe you're
And
correct.
there are no other agreements, right?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well, you're the president and CEO of the company, aren't you?
I am,
Wouldn't
yes,
you
sir.
know that?
I don't know everything.
Well, surely you would know if York had some other arrangement with his broadband provider, right?
I know there's been discussions about it. But I do not know that anything's been put into a contract because we're talking about something that could happen 20, 25 years down the road.
Okay. Did you sign the network agreement yourself personally?
I did.
Okay. All right. Have you signed any other agreements with Comporium?
Not that I'm aware of. I witnessed the one back in 2002. For the-
The joint use agreement?
The then manager, CEO, he signed it.
All right. Okay. So the state of play as it stands today is there's a joint use agreement and the network agreement, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So 20 years forward or whenever it's going to be when Comporium takes over the fiber, you'll agree with me, it's going to be at that point a third-party communications attacher just like Charter, right?
This is my interpretation. I think we'll have to have a different agreement to address that because it's a different situation.
Okay. But you don't have one now, right?
We do not have one out of
Okay.
my knowledge.
But just based on what exists today, and you'd agree with me generally, that way down the road, Comporium's attachments can have the same issues with clearance and separations that Charter's attachments can, right?
Any attachment can have
Right.
problems, yes, sir.
And at that point, again, under the Rock Hill agreement, Comporium would be responsible for fixing those, right?
They would.
Okay, right. And as a result, there can be the same kind of contractual issues with Comporium down the road that you talk about in your testimony with other communications attachers, right?
Sure,
Okay.
could be.
And there can be the same kind of safety hazards with Comporium's attachments down the road, just like there are with other communications attachers, right?
There could be, yes, sir.
And in that instance as well, the same sort of future growth needs that you've put forward as a justification for the 84 inches here with respect to Charter will also apply to Comporium, right?
It could.
Yeah, okay. Can you tell me how many poles York has replaced so far to accommodate Comporium's attachments?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but it's less than 100.
Okay, so very few.
Depends what you qualify as few, but
How many poles has Comporium attached to in total?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I know that we're putting fiber up on 400 miles of fiber eventually up on poles, so I don't have that number.
Okay, 400 miles total, you think?
I think 300, 400 miles, yes, sir.
Okay. And how far are the poles apart from each other generally in York's network?
That depends. There's some could be 250 to 400 feet apart.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Basha. I have no further questions. I pass the witness.
Mr. Warner, I wanted to ask about hearing exhibit 6. It was marked.
Oh, sure. Can I move that into evidence, please?
No objection.
Thank you. Hearing Exhibit 6 will be received into evidence. Let's see. South Carolina Telephone Coalition.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it Basha or Basha?
You can call me anything you want.
Either way, you'll go.
Just don't call me late for lunch.
Yeah, I gotcha. I've just got a few questions, but Mr. Werner's last line of questioning there, I'm not sure I completely followed, so I'm hoping I can get some clarification there.
Okay.
He was referring to how many poles have been changed out due to comporium attachments, but was he referring to York attachments?
I'm
or
not
comporium
sure.
Attachments?
That's a very good question. So there's been no comporium attachment, so you're
To
correct.
the extent that comporium has attachments, is pursuant to its attachment agreement.
That's right.
That you included as your exhibit, and it's attached to poles, and it's been doing that for
Right.
probably decades.
Right.
Is that correct?
I believe he was referring to poles we've had to change out of our own for our fiber, and I did not catch that when he asked the question.
Just for clarity, those are York attachments.
But that's correct. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Just to clarify some other stuff, and well, all of York's pole attachment agreements that are currently in place, they have the 18-foot and 84-inch clearance requirements that are in question here. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
I
those
believe there are
clearance,
4 or 5 companies. We have agreements with. All of them are the same.
multiple providers, you
Mhm.
have pole attachment agreements, they all have those clearance requirements.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? And those clearance requirements have been in place, the 18 feet and 84 inches have been in place since, I think your testimony said early 2000s, is that correct?
I believe the first one was signed in 2002, the last in 2004.
Again, for clarification, in your testimony yesterday, I think you said that York's broadband build-out, your attachment to these poles have been focused in areas that are unserved, is that correct?
That's correct.
So I'm concerned about a bit of a fairness issue here. When Charter is requesting that York pay the pole replacement costs, the make-ready costs, that may result from York's clearance requirements, from your 18 feet midspan and 84 inches,
Yes, sir.
is Charter saying York only needs to pay those costs in the unserved areas that Charter is seeking to serve?
I'm not sure exactly what their intent was there. But
They haven't clarified that for you.
no,
Best of your understanding, that request would apply in both served and unserved areas?
I believe so.
Has it been generally York's practice when its requirements may lead to clearance requirements, or there needs to be a pole replacement and that causes make-ready costs to exist, to attach to those poles? Has it generally been York's requirement that the cost causer be the one to pay those?
That's correct. The contract spells it out pretty clear.
Sure. So your current providers have all had to pay those make-ready costs when their attachment has caused that pole to need to be replaced.
That's
today.
correct. Yeah, we have some other spectrum attachments that are going on right now that they've paid those fees for us to change poles out.
So the point I'm getting at is isn't Charter actually asking York to cover costs to serve areas now, even if those areas may already be served by other providers?
Yeah, that's what it comes across as.
In some cases, do you know if any providers within all of York's territory may have actually buried their fiber to serve
Yes,
customers?
there's some that happens.
So and generally buried fiber is expensive.
It's more expensive than hanging on a pole.
But you have some providers who have buried that fiber to serve customers in their areas. Is that
I
correct?
believe all the providers in our area have buried in certain areas, in certain situations.
So what Charter is asking is that York pay some of their make-ready costs to cover their providing service in these areas, even where service may have already, these customers may have already been served. Another provider may have already invested to provide service there. Is that correct?
It appears so.
And that would be true even in areas where York has invested to serve unserved areas that haven't been served.
That's correct.
Now, Charter would ask that you cover, that York pay some of their costs to go serve those areas that currently have service where York has invested to serve.
It appears that way, sir.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
AT&T?
I won't call you late to supper, but it is your name, so I want to call you what you'd like to be. How
Basha.
Basha.
Be fine. Thank you, sir.
I suspect you and I will speak for less than 10 minutes. First of all, yesterday you testified, I believe, that in the period of 1993 to 2003, you were manager of engineering for York.
That's correct.
At some point during that time period, were you, at some point in that time period, for lack of a better term, were you the head of the engineering group at York?
Yes, this is a small group. Yes, I was the head of that group.
And prior to around 2000, my understanding is that the general attachment requirements, if you will, for York were at a 15.5-foot mid-span clearance and an 84-inch communications worker safety zone clearance. Is that about right?
Before the agreement in 2002, 2004, it was 40 inches.
Okay. I thought we said, let me ask you this. My understanding was prior to 2000, York required a 40-inch communication safety zone clearance.
40 and 15 and a half. Yes.
Okay, and a 15.5 mid-span. Thank you for the clarification. In around 2000, those were changed to 18-foot mid-span and 84-inch safety zone, correct?
That's correct.
In my notes from yesterday during your conversation with Mr. Ellerby reflect that there were basically 3 reasons that York made that increase. My notes said that you said there were safety, growth, and workmanship issues. Does that sound right from your conversation with Mr. Ellerby yesterday?
I would characterize it as safety first, operational efficiency, and costs put on our members that they should not have to bear. Those 3.
Fair enough.
I probably characterize them a little different, but yeah.
That's fair enough. Thank you. I want to speak about that last issue for just a moment.
Okay.
One of the reasons that York increased the clearance requirements when it did was it was disappointed in how other attachers were meeting their contractual obligations under those existing contracts, right?
Right. That was one of the 3 reasons. Yes, sir.
And one of the reasons for that disappointment was that the companies were not reimbursing York when York had gone in and moved those companies' communications facilities pursuant to the contract.
That was one part of it. Yes, sir.
And I recall that yesterday you testified that York thought that was unacceptable because in York's view, the effect was that York's members were subsidizing the operations of those communications companies.
I believe that's what I said. Yes, sir.
And I got the impression from your conversation with Mr. Ellerby yesterday that over time, in York's view, that was happening more frequently and those total amounts of reimbursed costs were starting to accumulate.
That's fair.
Okay. During that time frame, could you give us an idea of how many times York instituted legal proceedings against communications companies to either enforce the contractual obligations or to seek reimbursement for what York viewed as subsidies that those communications companies were receiving because they weren't reimbursing?
Now, it's going back 20 years, so the cobwebs there a little bit. But we sent multiple invoices to several. I remember one case where we did an inspection, We found, won't name the company, over 100 violations. We sent them notice. We fixed some things that were going to be a detriment to the public and to worker safety. We invoiced them that and sent them a map showing need to fix these. And 3 years later, we did inspections again. None of those have been fixed. But as far as legal proceedings, I think one time we had a lawyer send a letter to one of the companies. We did not file suit or anything of that nature.
Thank you. Shifting gears, and this should be my last line of questions. Can we agree that in general, York attempts to avoid doing things that are prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code?
That's a fair statement.
So back in that time frame we've just been discussing, when the contract required a 15.5-foot midspan clearance, we can agree that 15.5 midspan clearance did not violate the National Electric Safety Code, right?
That's what the National Safety Code called for at that time, yes.
Still calls for the same today, right?
Mhm.
And can we agree that at the time, that 15.5-foot midspan clearance in that contract was not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code?
I believe that's a fair statement.
And the same thing with regard to the then existing in the contract, 40-inch communication worker safety clearance zone. Can we agree that that 40-inch requirement at the time in the contract was not prohibited by the National Electric Safety Code?
I believe that's correct.
And can we agree that today the National Safety Code's clearance for that communication worker safety zone remains 40 inches?
It does.
Madam Chair, I am tempted to ask a few questions about that contract, but I'm going to honor what I said yesterday and not address it in this proceedings. But I do want to go on the record as saying we would reserve our right at the appropriate time and the appropriate manner to do so. I don't know if we will, but I do want to reserve that right. But with that, I have no further questions for Mr. Basham.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Office of Regulatory Staff.
No questions for ORS. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioners. Commissioner Justin Williams, I think I see your light first.
Good morning, Mr. Basha.
Good morning.
I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask, but the priority for me is trying to understand this agreement with, not necessarily the agreement with Comporium. I'm not so much concerned about that as much as I'm concerned about how Comporium is using your infrastructure, your lines, whatever the technical term may be, to provide broadband service. Could you explain that to me again, please?
Yes, and again, I'm not a fiber expert, but they transport data through our fiber lines to the end user. And in that end user's house, there is Comporium equipment that allows it to connect to their computers, phones, TVs, whatever else. So it's kind of like we're kind of, I use that term from the other day, a conduit. We're a conduit of getting that data from Comporium source to the home.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. And whatever the line is, the fiber, whatever the technical term is for that, that infrastructure, is it the same, the height? Is it the same height requirement that you require for Spectrum in this case, if they were to attach to your pole?
Because we own it, the National Electric Safety Code allows us to attach our fiber in what's called the power space. And so that's, since we own it, we attached it there. So it would not be the same attachment point that a third party would have.
And so the answer to my question is no.
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Basha, could you define discrimination for me?
Not treating two parties equally for the same situation.
Okay. So Spectrum wants to attach to your poles for what purpose, from your understanding?
To provide internet and other services, I presume.
Okay. And wherever your line is, the line that Comporium is using to provide broadband service, Spectrum can't connect at that height, can they?
That's correct.
And that line that Comporium has access to provides broadband service, does it not?
That's correct. If I may, they don't have access to the line. They just transport data through the line.
Understood.
Thank you.
But broadband is going through the line, correct?
That's correct.
So how are you not treating Spectrum differently?
Because the fiber is owned by us. That is our property, that we've installed on the pole, and the attachments by a third party such as Spectrum would not be owned by us and not allowed to be in the electric space. That is an electric safety code rule, that who can be in electric space and who cannot.
So because you own it, you don't have to follow the same safety standard that you want Spectrum to follow?
We have to follow the safety standard, yes, but we're allowed to put our own facilities in this area. Also, too, I would add that we're using that fiber for communication between devices. So it's addition besides just, it's not purely for broadband. There are other things that we have and will be using it for to communicate to our electrical devices.
I understand that, sir, and that's really not of interest to me here, but I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'm interested in the provision of broadband and your requirements for Spectrum versus your requirements for the line that you own, that you allow Comporium to use to provide broadband service. And I just want to make sure I give you an opportunity to explain that situation to the best of your ability. And so what I'm understanding from your testimony is that, and you're citing the NESC, but what I'm hearing is because you own that line, you are not following or abiding by the height requirement that you want Spectrum to abide by.
That's fair. There are two standards.
I'm not trying to interrupt you. I'm not really interested in whether you think it's fair or not. I just want to know, is my understanding correct? Am I understanding you correctly to say that you have a line that you own that does not meet the same height requirement that you want Spectrum to meet, right?
You're correct, sir.
All right. And the line that you own that doesn't meet that height requirement for Spectrum to provide broadband, you are allowing Comporium to provide broadband.
Through our facilities, yes, sir, you're correct.
Okay. And so the testimony about safety and the accidents, the dump trucks snagging the line, all those issues, how does that impact the line that you use or you allow Comporium to use to provide broadband?
Well, it's our facilities, our fiber is attached to the higher point, so there's no concern about farm equipment, trucks snagging it. So that, to answer one question.
Mm-hmm.
The other is the only folks who will be working in the electric space are our employees or our contractors who are qualified to work on it. So I don't see a safety issue, just from my opinion, of how that's done.
Okay. Do you know whether or not that line has capacity to provide broadband service for more than one company?
There's a lot of fiber in there. I'm not a fiber engineer, but I believe it's possible, but I don't know how all that works.
Understood. Well, it's good to explore the possibilities for the sake of fairness. I'm going to just ask a couple more questions and move on as I gather my thoughts. There was some information that you didn't know, you didn't have the answer to, namely information about the number of accidents or some of the issues associated with safety that happened, I think, back in 93 to 2003 or so forth and so on. Is that something that you could get access to if you asked?
I could ask some questions. I did reference yesterday, I believe, that in the areas where the attachers have gone to the 18-foot minimum, I do not recall any, if maybe only one, that has caused an issue with pole damage or a piece of equipment catching the line and tearing something down. So the 18-foot has seemed to have remedied that concern and thus kept the public safer and our facility safer.
Okay.
But I don't have any particulars. That's just my recollection.
Understood. When you allow Comporium to use that electric line, are there any changes that York is required to make to the pole?
There have been some pole change outs that we've had to make for clearance.
Okay. Well, generally speaking, is there a need for a new pole or alterations that have significant costs?
There have been some. I think I referenced that less than 100 poles have been changed. I don't recall the exact number. And sometimes we have to rearrange some equipment on the pole. It's not often, but it does happen.
Okay. Is that an answer that you could find out for us? How many poles that York had to alter to allow Comporium to use its electric line to
I
provide
surely
broadband?
can, sir.
Okay. Madam Chair, may I ask for a late filed exhibit?
Commissioner Williams, that'll be marked and reserved as hearing exhibit 7.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, sir.
Be glad to honor that, sir.
And Commissioner Williams, could I get a description of how to reserve this?
Madam Chair, I would like to know the number of poles York has had to alter or replace to allow Comporium to access their lines to provide broadband.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could clarify, Comporium is under the pole attachment agreement, the 2002 pole attachment agreement. Comporium is providing broadband in lots of areas. The agreement between York and Comporium for this fiber project is a different part of the York service territory. So it's not going into the areas where Comporium and Charter have been providing broadband in the York service territory. It's my understanding, and I hope to clarify that when Mr. Basher talked about the 100 poles, that's in connection with the fiber project that he has described that we think is, of course, not properly before the commission. I don't want to waive that, but if that is my understanding of what the exchange was about and what we were being asked to supply as a late filed exhibit was the approximately around 100 poles that York replaced as part of that fiber project under this agreement where the fiber will be owned by York Electric Cooperative.
And Madam Chair and Commissioner Williams, do I also understand that your inquiry dealt with the total number of poles that the fiber that York has, to which Comporium has access, the total number of poles to which that fiber is attached versus the number, some number under 100, where the poles may have had to be replaced?
Yes, I mean, I heard a lot of I don't knows, or, I really maybe however you phrased it, but I didn't hear answers to a lot of questions. I just want that information, particularly the number of poles that have been replaced and the number of poles that provide service through the electric wire, broadband
Glad to
service.
supply that for you, sir.
Thank you.
And again, just not to belabor the point, but this is part of the fiber project under the arrangement between York and Comporium, by which York will put fiber in and install it and own it and allow Comporium to use it. Because, and the reason I'm making that point is Comporium attaches to lots of other York poles for the purpose of providing broadband in other parts of the York service territory.
Commissioner Williams, does that clarify and comport with what you're asking for?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
That's all I have for now, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Mr. Baccia.
Good morning.
You know, you've defined discrimination, and sometimes when we deal with this discrimination or discriminatory behavior, it's a result of favoritism. And I think what we're trying to get to the bottom of is exactly what is the relationship between York Co-op and Comporium. Is there any ownership beyond just these contracts? And can you tell me what the relationship is?
Be glad to. May I go back and give a quick history of how we got here? I think that would help the commission if I may.
Well, you know, a lot of it, we're dealing with a brand new law. So some
Yeah.
of this 2002, 2000 stuff really kind of, some of it goes out the window. I mean,
Does.
yeah, sure, you can phrase it any way you like.
Thank
but-
you. I just think it would be beneficial. If you go back 2017, 2018, our area was growing real fast. We were growing at about 9%, and then the whole up part of South Carolina was growing that way. We had the haves and have-nots. We have 60,000 of our had meters at that time. All of them had internet, except for about 5,000 in the rural parts of York County. And these people would often call and say, "Can you help us get internet?" And we would say, "You know, we're trying, but we really can't do anything." Matter of fact, the county councilman from that area, he said he got more calls about internet than he did about roads, which is interesting. And you know, we operate from one basic thing: to look out for the member. And our board got calls after calls, "Can you help us?" So in September of 2019, the board gave me a directive to find a way to get these people internet. And so we started talking to people. We talked to different providers and said, you know, "Can you please go put internet in this area?" And the answer we got usually back was, "It's not cost effective," which we understand. So we talked to Comporium. At first, we didn't come to agreement because it was cost prohibitive. And as you noticed from the dates, it took a while to get there. And finally, when we did, we had an agreement with them where we would put fiber on our poles. This is to answer your question. And they would basically pump the data through our fiber to the home. And then, as noted here in the email, we would share revenue, and that money would come back to help pay for our investment. But our whole motive is we didn't want to do this. We still don't want to be a fiber company. The payback right now, and I did a report for our board 2 weeks ago, is 21 years. No one wants to do investment to pay back 21 years. But we felt like we wanted to take care of those people, and it was a directive the board gave me to find a way. So the only way we found to make that work was to partner with Comporium for them to be able to pump that data through our lines to those people in the area.
Well, again, as far as the relationship, does the co-op in any way own part of Comporium, or
No, sir.
just get a payback on whatever they sell? You get
That's
a
correct. We don't own any part of Comporium.
Okay. And I think there was in your testimony, more than one place you talked about contractor safety, that you were concerned about any cable company, any broadband service, the safety of their people.
Yes.
Okay. But because they use contractors. Yeah. You use contractors too, do you not?
We do.
Comporium uses contractors too. And yet they're allowed in the, what you call the electric zone.
To clarify, sir, the Comporium contractors are not allowed in the electric zone. This is just the ones that have been, the contractors we use to install the fiber.
Okay. I'm real familiar with York County. I have friends in McConnell, which is a beautiful area in city of York. My friend Commissioner Thomas here in Rock Hill and other people I know in Rock Hill. I'm just trying to understand some of your service area. Rock Hill has their own municipality as far as electric service, is that correct?
That's correct.
Does York have their own municipality service?
No, sir, they're served by Duke Power.
Okay. And is there a dividing line as far as where Duke Power serves and where the co-op serves? Or yours, do they overlap with rural areas, or how does that work?
Yes, sir. Back in 1969, the state legislature did something called territorial assignment, and they divided the state up into assigned to power companies and assigned to co-ops, and they have some unassigned areas too. So we try not to overlap because that's not efficient to deliver electricity.
Well, let's, like the north part of the county, like Fort Mill and Tigakay and all that, is that Duke or is that yours?
We serve a lot of that area,
Okay.
a lot of the Fort Mill area, but Duke serves some too.
Well, when you get into, apparently there's some new subdivisions that are in the rural area that you would serve being built.
That's correct.
When you get into these new subdivisions, obviously, all these services are put underground. And of course, if you go underground, Comporium goes underground with you, is that right?
In the subdivisions in the 5,000 member area we're working on is we would put that fiber underground, just like it's on a pole through conduits, and then Comporium would attach to the customer's house.
Okay. When you go underground like that, how could Spectrum or any other company go along too?
Well, they do. They put in underground right next to our underground. So
Okay.
it's just a matter of getting an easement from the developer.
So and it's all being done at the same time during the development, not after.
Usually it's done all at the same time. Like natural gas goes in at the same time. Yes, sir.
Okay. Also, there was some talk about these incidents where there was a farm equipment or something that caused a problem or hit a line or whatever. Are there a lot of these incidents in York County, or do you know how many there have been recently? Or
There've been some. I don't know if y'all are aware, but the Farmers Association has asked us to raise our clearance to 21 feet because they've got newer equipment coming. It's interesting. This is not part of my testimony, but I had a phone call from a farmer who's a board member this morning, and he had a situation where a new fiber has been attached to a Duke power pole, and he couldn't get his equipment in because the line was down at about where his head was. And so this happens a good bit. Now he wasn't injured and no equipment was damaged, but he was able to work around it and get back in his field.
Yeah. Well, I'm from the PD, and I'm very used to farm equipment. Had a cotton gin 2 miles or less from where I grew up. And that's one thing, we can grow cotton here, y'all can't. Could you explain to me exactly what you mean by hurdle rate?
I think when we were dealing with that, as has been referenced already, that when all the investment is paid back, we have the option of selling our facilities to Comporium. But as I noted, it could be 25 years from now.
Okay.
I believe the hurdle rate, and I don't have the contract here in front of me, is just basically a little bit of a cost of living increase of our investment, so that if it's 30 years from now, the time value of money is calculated.
Sure. When Comporium owns this, does that affect other carriers? I mean, if they have the lines and everything else, does that in any way shut out competition?
No, actually, by us being attached higher up, it does leave more room on the pole for other communication folks to attach.
Okay. One more question.
Yes, sir.
If you had a do-over, would you have dressed this crowd a little differently?
Yes, sir. Valid point.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Vice Chair Powers. We've been going about an hour and a half. Let's take a break until 11:10. That's about 13 minutes. Thank you. Good morning. We are back in session in docket number 2022-188-EC. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Jay Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser, and with us virtually we have Commissioner Irvin. We are on commissioner questions of witness Basha. Commissioner Carol Lee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belser. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Basha. Good to meet you.
Same here, ma'am.
You have an exhibit that's been referred to a few times. It's EPB 8, and it's the drawing. Did you make the drawing yourself?
One of our folks did. I'm not that great of a drawer.
Okay. It's good to have resources like that.
Amen.
I want to you to walk me through each element because it seems really critical to the relationship with the NESC standards and prohibitions as well. So starting with the top horizontal line, what does this represent?
It
And what
represents
purpose?
a aluminum conductor that's carrying around 73,000 volts.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Williams, is it okay if the witness places his diagram on the ELMA?
Thank you, Commissioner Williams.
Thank you.
Perfect. So kind of starting over the top horizontal line, what purpose does it serve? What does this represent? And how is it labeled, just for the record?
Okay, it's labeled as phase, and the purpose there is to bring voltage, electric current to the transformer, to the homes and businesses it serves. The squiggly line between the pole and the phase, that's an insulator. Shall I continue down, or do you want to ask questions?
No, that's great. Why don't you keep going?
Okay, I want to do it how you want it done.
The line between the transformer and the phase. Then.
Okay, that's a neutral. Neutral.
Well, there's also.
Oh, I'm sorry. The little line. Okay, my apologies. I missed that.
No, connecting the two.
That's
or connecting
referred
the
to as a stinger, and is the wire that brings the voltage and current from the phase wire to the top of the transformer. I apologize for leaving that one out. The other is the neutral. The neutral serves as a ground, but also, I won't get into electric current flow, but it's a return path so that, just like if your house outlet, you've got a hot connector and an outlet and you have a ground, a neutral. Electricity has a return path, so there is current flowing through that neutral, but there's not a prescribed voltage on it. If I may go down, then you have the transformer. Transformer is a tank of oil and copper that basically converts the 7,300 volts down to 120 and 240 volts. On the front of that transformer, there are two little squares with wires, lines coming out of them. Those are the conductors that go into the conduit and go to your home. Each carries 120 volts. Across those two conductors, the voltage is 240. The wire coming from the neutral wire going into the same conduit is a neutral connector to go into your home. And then you have below that is the communications cable. And just right at that is the conduit that we spoke of yesterday, which protects the wire going into the ground into your home. Was that adequate, ma'am?
Yes. Does the conduit run all the way to the top of the pole, and why or why not?
No, ma'am. It stops right below the transformer.
And that's across the board, because I realize this is an example, but just.
Yes, ma'am. That is across the board.
Okay.
Because if you ran it to the top of the pole, then you would have the low voltage wires intersecting with the high voltage, and that could be detrimental to the public and to your home.
Are you aware of any NESC rules that relate to the pole itself, or is it just related to clearance of the lines?
I'm not an NESC expert, but I believe it predominantly is clearances for safety between conductors and communication cables and the public and that sort of thing.
In this image, can the transformer be placed in any other position on the pole?
It
Can
can
it be placed
be.
higher? Can it be placed lower?
Very good question. If you look at most of the IOU construction, such as Duke Energy, the transformer is placed a little bit lower down the pole. And in co-op land, we attach it closer to the neutral. And I'd be glad to give you the reasoning for that if you like.
Yes, please.
Most co-ops began back in very rural parts of the country, and the thinking was if that phase wire noted on top were to break, the closer the neutral wire is to the phase wire, the faster it will trip the line out and de-energize the line before it hits the ground and endanger the public. That was but Duke Power and others put it down lower, and either one's fine.
What is your opinion regarding this image and any prohibitions in the NESC related to the midspan height clearance?
Well, you would attach obviously as high as you can to allow for a higher mid-span clearance, as been talked about yesterday. Obviously, you got 2 points. The higher you attach either side, the higher the midpoint is.
And are there any prohibitions?
Just that attachment can't be, within 40 inches of the energized conductors.
So the prohibition that we're talking about is just the 40-inch standard.
That's right.
What about for the midspan clearance? Any prohibitions there?
Just that a couple things are that you need to have 15.5 feet according to the code at that midspan. But that is also when it's got up to a 1/4 inch ice on it or under heavy wind arrest, which will make it sag down lower, which is another reason we went to the 18 to give it a little more clearance in case we had an ice storm. But yes, ma'am. The only other thing, midspan, there is a provision in the NESC that you can't be too close to another conductor in midspan. So, in other words, if the conductor, something above you sags down a lot into yours, there has to be a spacing difference, and I don't recall what it is, I apologize, between communication conductors and electrical conductors in midspan.
Shifting gears a little bit, but you might be able to use this exhibit to talk about it. Earlier, you talked about an NESC standard relating to the electric zone and who can work there and who cannot work there.
Mm-hmm.
Would you describe that again as it relates to this image?
Sure. And I know there's people in the room that know the electric code better than I do, but I believe that the 40 inches from our neutral down to communication code area is the electric zone. Anything above that the bottom of the 40 inches. So if you would go to that drawing, everything above where the communication is attached up would be the electric zone.
So
All the
from
way to the top of the pole,
communication
up.
From communication to phase is the electric zone.
That's my understanding.
Okay. And are there standards for who can work in that area, and what do you have to do to be able to work in that area?
You have to be qualified to work in around energized conductors, and there's special equipment that you have to wear. It's something called approach distances, that if you get within so many inches of an energized conductor, you have to have insulation on your body. You have to be in an insulated truck or operating a insulated stick. But there's training that goes along with that.
Are there requirements for the area underneath the communication, from the communication line down?
I don't know what the requirements are for communication workers for their training, but of course there are requirements of being safely operating a bucket truck or climbing the pole appropriately, and the safety off on the pole if they're climbing, those kind of things. But beyond that, I don't know, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Okay. I may have other questions in a few minutes, but I appreciate those answers, and I'm going to pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. And good morning, Mr. Basha,
Good morning again.
my former electric provider. I was thinking back a little bit, just the timing, and so it was before Hurricane Hugo that I was a co-op customer, so that'd be before your time, I suppose.
Yes, I came July 5th of 1989.
And Commissioner Powers asked a question or made a comment just a little while ago that made me think about something else too. I've lived in a number of different homes, and they're probably 10 miles apart at most. And within that 10 miles apart, I've been an electric co-op, York Electric Co-op customer, a Duke Energy customer, and a City of Rock Hill customer. I never thought about that till just now, but that's kind of interesting that they just run so close together. But anyway, so one other thing, we were talking about when people potentially owe money, cause damages, and so forth, that sometimes you don't get paid the way you should. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think there is some enforcement or compliance provisions in this BBA. I was looking at section 58-9-3030F. And I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if that stuff really applies or not, but I was just going to throw that out there just in case you have issues with people paying for damages that in the future. So let me ask a question in connection with the Comporium agreement. I understand that you guys are working hard to get broadband into customers because people are complaining about it, and just because it's the right thing to do. And you ended up entering this agreement with Comporium. And so my question is, would you have entered into exactly the same contract with AT&T, Spectrum, or anybody else if they had been willing to do so?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We were all about getting it to the member, and we want to find the best means possible.
And does that agreement cover your entire service area?
No, good question, sir. It only covers a small area that didn't have service. So we're not going to build fiber into Rock Hill, Fort Mill, any of these areas are already served. Only places we're going are just the areas who at that time did not have any service. And that we're restricted just to that.
Okay. So I guess basically this contract covers all of that unserved area. And so then that kind of eliminates the possibility at this point of signing the same exact contract with AT&T, Spectrum, or whoever.
At this point, I believe so. But, we were very open to work with anybody that would work to get fiber to the people.
Okay. So just from a practical standpoint, if at this point in time that York Electric Co-op were to go back to the old 40-inch and 15.5-foot standards, what would be the practical impact on York Electric Co-op over the next, let's just say, year to 5 years?
Just any attachments that we'd have to go back to the old way of doing it, of trying to get them to come in lower if we had to put a transformer up. And of course, we might be more susceptible to equipment and trucks catching the newly installed fiber, which would not be under this current height requirement.
Okay. And then potentially if someone else wanted to come in and attach to the poles, then would that entail make-ready activities and costs for?
It could.
And I'm not real sure I understand who pays those make-ready costs. I've heard a lot of discussion, but I'm not sure. Can you help me understand that?
I can attempt to, sir. So if you own a communication company and you want to attach the poles, we would require y'all to bring in drawings of where you want to attach and some measurements of where you find where we are now, and then your opinion of which poles need to be changed or things rearranged. And then we would verify those measurements and come back to you with a plan of, we agree these 10 poles need to be changed, and we'd give you a price estimate to begin that work.
Okay. All right. So let's just say moving to allowing those 40-inch and 15.5-foot clearances, if somebody came in and wanted to attach, then you would be only working on the poles that they're trying to attach to. It's not like you'd have to go back system-wide and make changes. Is that correct?
I believe that all the poles prior to any change would be covered under the other contract. And so, yes, that'd be just any new poles going forward.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Bosch, I have a couple of questions, if please. As president of York Electric, are you familiar when York Electric is under this commission's jurisdiction and when it's not?
I'm somewhat, I probably can't quote you exactly, but I'm fairly aware.
Well, electric cooperatives generally in South Carolina don't come to this commission for any kind of regulatory authority. Is that correct?
I think like our cutoff times, temperatures, things like that, and
disconnect,
disconnect, yes.
Territorial assignment. I think there's some exceptions if you're extending lines through other utilities, service areas, or that might be one.
That's correct. And I think the ORS has some review capabilities too of some things.
But as far as the commission's rules and regulations, other than maybe the disconnect, and actually that's by statute, and I think y'all had to file with the ORS some disconnect procedures.
I know we submitted.
Does that sound correct?
That sounds correct.
Does that sound correct? But as far as the commission's rules and regulations, is there any requirement that York Electric or any cooperative, I'm using York because you're here, but any cooperative, adhere to the commission's rules and regulations?
I don't believe so. I guess I'd need to can you give me an example?
Well, it's not in your testimony, but in Mr. Booth's testimony, he refers to Regulation 103-361, which is under engineering for electrical utilities, and it references the National Electric Safety Code. Are you familiar with that?
I saw that, yes.
Okay, and that regulation has some language in it that speaks that the National Electric Safety Code as minimum standards. Is that correct?
That's correct, minimum standards.
But ordinarily, when y'all engineer your system, are you looking at the PSC's regulations?
No, we're looking at National Electric Safety Code and good engineering practices.
Okay, and even the co-ops are, and this is a legal thing, but there are separate statutory provisions in Title 33 that.
Yeah, there's an enabling act.
Thank you. That govern electric cooperatives.
That's correct.
And are you aware that there is also a statute in Title 33 that basically says that the co-ops are exempt from PSC regulation except for things like territorial assignment. This Broadband Act was added to that.
That's correct.
So it's only in very limited circumstances.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. The Charter Spectrum, I'm never sure how to, I think Spectrum is what shows up on the television, but They currently operate under an agreement with York
Yes, ma'am.
presently, right?
It was dated in 2004.
Right, and that's the one that's attached, I believe, to your sir rebuttal testimony. Is
correct,
that
ma'am.
correct? And that is ongoing. There are some provisions on notice for either party wanting to
Yes, ma'am.
end the agreement, but it's ongoing, is
Yes,
it?
ma'am. On Concord Road in our area, they are attaching to our poles per the old agreement right now.
And but the old agreement included that 18-foot
That's correct.
attachment point, did it not?
Midspan clearance of
Midspan,
18.
thank you. And did that old agreement also include for the increased
Spacing?
spacing on the pole?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are y'all negotiating a new agreement?
We have been working on negotiating a new agreement with them.
Because that old one was a Time Warner agreement, and they subsumed Time Warner, so.
Right,
that's
we are
why.
working on negotiating a new agreement.
Okay. Okay. One thing, I had a question. You mentioned earlier in response to questions, and you were describing the line, and you used the term secondary service and primary service. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. Primary is, as I mentioned in the drawing, is the 7300 volt line, the phase wire on that drawing we had up a moment ago. Secondary is anything that operates below 480 volts and below. I think it's technically in the code 600 volts. So that is the wires running from a transformer down a pole to a house. Technically, the secondary is to the last attachment before it comes to the house, and then that is called a service. But that's just what they call it. I mean, they're the same wires, same voltage. So really, secondary and service are the same.
The illustration that was just put on the Elmo, and I'm not really referring to that, but that is a very basic,
Very basic.
system. I mean, generally, there are crossbars on the lines.
Cross arms, yes, ma'am.
Cross arms. Does it matter if they're cross arms and how many they are as to the clearance spaces on the pole?
No, ma'am. The number of phase wires on the pole and cross arms, it does drop things down a little bit, but the clearance is the same.
Drop things down.
So in other words, the neutral is going to be maybe a little bit lower when you have to put a cross arm in. It's a matter of inches.
Okay. There were some pictures attached to your direct testimony, and you indicated that Mr. Booth will be explaining some
That's
of those. Okay. I'll wait for those. It sounds, and disagree with me and correct me where I may be wrong here, but it sounds that there are some contractual issues or that York could avail themselves of, which York has just chosen not to with regard to recovery of cost where they haven't been paid. Is that a correct statement?
That's fair. We've done, like as I mentioned earlier, a letter from our attorney years ago. We've done multiple invoices. We've not filed suit against anybody to recover those costs.
And I believe the contracts speak to inspections and periodic inspections as well.
Every 3 years.
And that's by York inspecting your entire system, basically.
Right.
Okay.
We aren't obligated to inspect every 3 years, but we're allowed to inspect every 3 years, if I remember correctly.
Okay. And at those points, what remedies would York have if they find that the inspections reveal non-compliance issues, and what would York do?
In the past, we have taken a map marking the poles and showing what the clearance issues are, and submit those to the communication company. And more of a modern era, we would not only do that, we would actually attach a picture and send that to them also, showing the clearances, similar to the pictures that were in testimony. So something like that we would send to them.
And how long is a communications provider allowed to correct the deficiencies?
I believe the contract is 30 days, 30 business days. The contract says.
And how what would York do if they were not corrected in that time?
We would send them another notice, asking them to look at it, and then we'd probably, if another several years went by and we did another inspection, we would note those again and highlight them as being they haven't been done since last time.
Okay, several years. I mean, you're going to wait till the next inspection.
If something's a safety concern, then we would act proactively to get it taken care of and just on our own costs and invoice them for that.
Okay.
But if it's simply maybe a guy wire that's not in the right place, something minor, then we may not continue to pursue that. We would wait to the next inspection.
Well, I guess my concern is that the reasoning given for the increased spacing is a safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you not you, but how
Sure.
can the utility let that go uncorrected for that length of time
I
if
guess
it's
I correct
truly a safety issue?
True. If it's a safety issue, we would not. We have always gone and fixed those and tried to invoice the cable or communications company for those. But I'm talking about something where maybe we found a connector a little loose or a guy wire a little loose, something that's not a safety concern, that's more of a maintenance issue. But if there's a safety issue, we have proactively either asked them to fix it. If they wouldn't, we fixed it before.
And have you had issues with payment of those invoices where the co-op has had to go in and make those corrections?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay. And then if those go unpaid, then what action has the co-op taken?
We've written some of those off, which is unfortunate. We've done a letter from an attorney about some of them. That's been years back. And we predominantly have continued to talk to the local folks about getting this paid. And occasionally we'll keep a file of them and we'll go back to them again, maybe a few months later or a year later, and say, these still have not been paid.
Is there any kind of escalation procedure? I mean, do you have the right people? I noticed one name in the contract is the contact or to provide notices to. And that was from what, 2000 something. Is that gentleman even still there? I don't know.
I believe I was the contact person back when the contract was written.
So, I mean, are there procedures to update those? Are there procedures to escalate
Yes.
to get these things done? And do
We-
y'all
we-
pursue those?
We have tried, everything short of filing suit. And, just our culture is, we'd rather not sue other folks, especially, we'd rather work things out in a good southerly manner. But, maybe in light of all these questions, maybe we should have pursued.
I'm just
legally.
curious.
Yeah, it's a good question.
So, okay. These lines we're talking about and the increased height of the poles, is it, and you may have heard some of my questions yesterday about, are these just the poles that are running along the side of the road, or are these the poles that are going across the road where somebody would come underneath? Is there a true need to replace every single pole, or just where there needs to be this extra clearance, like a road crossing or a drive crossing? Or
Yeah, I remember your question. It was a very good question yesterday. Predominantly more issues occur at road crossings, but as I mentioned, what the phone call I had today, that was going on the side of a road where farm equipment was trying to go in and out of a field. So it's more of an issue at road crossings, you're correct. And we historically use a little taller pole along road crossings just to give more clearance for everything, communications, us, everything. But it's really an issue all along, but predominantly the worst case is road crossings, you're correct.
well, and let's talk about the call you got this morning. I mean, I grew up in Clarendon County, and we got a lot of farmland down there. And I mean, most of the farmers that I'm aware of, they just don't enter the field from the road anywhere. There's usually an entryway
Right.
that, because there are ditches all along the road.
you're correct.
And so it just seems like these areas that, where they're either entering these fields or, I don't know, maybe it's the roadway up to some houses set back from the road, that those are noticeable. It's not necessarily every pole.
Fair point. Predominantly there are paths, just like, that where they usually go in and out. But, if we put a pole up there, we commented yesterday, the life of a pole could be, 50, 60 years. Things change. But you're correct. There is predominantly a farmer will use the same path unless something really changes. I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank
That's
you,
all
ma'am.
I have. Commissioners, Commissioner Caston?
It's still morning.
Sure is.
Good morning. And to not slight you, I noted that you were a Clemson graduate.
That's correct.
I could tell. No. We have engineering too, other than Purdue, Mr. Bingham. I don't think I ever made a boiler though.
Nor have I.
A lot to digest.
Absolutely.
And before I get to specific question, I want to kind of go over what I think I've heard, what I think I understand, and at any point, raise your hand, stop. If no, that point's not right, or you can wait till I finish. But
Okay.
listening to Commissioner Justin Williams' questions and the other questions, you said, or you've stated that York Electric would prefer not to be in the communication business. The area from the, I guess, phase to the communication line is York Electric's area,
The electric space.
the electric space, and you've got to be qualified to mess around in that, and only you guys do that unless, I guess, you allow others to do that are certified.
Other contractors are certified. Yes, sir.
The agreement, or I guess the standard for the poles was modified, and I've heard like 3 different years, 2000, 2002, 2004. Is it one of those, or is it kind of one of those?
Well, I think we have contracts with up to 4 communication companies. And as you know how contracts negotiations, some take longer than others. And so we started, I think some of them are 2002, some 2004, there's some in between. But yeah, it was just whenever we were able to finish negotiations and have those contracts signed.
So the revised standard has been around since at least 2004.
That's correct.
And to your knowledge, there is no code, electric safety, or otherwise, that prevents or prohibits that standard change.
That's correct. May I add something?
Of course.
To the best of my knowledge, we've had no complaints from any of our communication companies up until this case occurred. And, so that's been, 19 years?
That was my next question. Save me time. Are you familiar, or have you read this Title 58, Article 25 on relative to BAA?
It's been a while, and not to prepare for this case, I have not. I was involved a little bit in discussions when that was drafted, but I'm not familiar with it. I apologize.
It's okay. I got to do a word search, so it made it a little easier. But to my knowledge, and I'm sure the smart people out there will correct it if it's wrong, I cannot find the term underserved anywhere. If it may be. The only thing I can find is unserved. Vanity. Matter of fact, 58-9-3000. Under B9, it simply says the provisions of this chapter are reasonably related to the legislative objective of facilitating access to broadband services in unserved areas throughout the state. So, what I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around and understand, and I think I'm hearing these things, is that York Electric and the agreement you've reached with Comporium is specific to a small area that is specifically unserved. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if AT&T, Spectrum, and I don't know who else, whomever, I guess negotiated a similar, equal to or similar contract that you have, you would not have discriminated against that.
No, we actually contacted, after the board gave me that directive, we reached out to our local contacts, and I think a lot of them are no longer with companies, and just started reaching out and saying, can we find a way to make it work? And as I mentioned earlier, the responses we got back were, it's not cost effective, and which I understand. So, and then Comporium, after some negotiations, we were able to come up with an arrangement.
So, is this debate or argument or what we're sitting here for specifically related to unserved areas?
I believe the first part of this, which is the basis of the case, is that the attachment issues. But anything having to do with Comporium is solely for unserved areas.
So, and I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm really trying to understand what I guess what the conflict is. But so, well, let me ask these questions.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask this one just because. Does York Electric have a master plan that considers projected growth and demand?
We do. We're required to do a 20-year long-range plan. We just completed one, and we have to do what's considered a construction work plan every 4 years.
So do you kind of update that every 4 years, your master plan, when you do your construction plan, or is the master plan for 20 years and you never think about it again?
What we do is we pull the master plan out while we're doing the 4-year plan, because the master plan looks at where we need future substation and line upgrades. And so it kind of contemplates bigger needs like future substation locations. So we try to make sure that those two are married together.
High growth areas tend to speed those up.
Yes, and they tend to put growth where you don't always anticipate growth to occur.
Amen. Why does York, I think I can't remember if it was in maybe the questioning testimony, York Electric said does not allow Charter Spectrum to submit applications with more than 25 polls per week. Why is that?
Actually, I checked back with our folks recently about that. When they came in, they said, we want to, talk to you about attaching to all these polls. And the first submittals did not have drawings like the contract required. And so they went back and said, let's refine our process and let's get the drawings right, and we can be able to ramp that number up from 25 to 100 to a faster pace. I guess originally the analogy I would give you, sir, is, you know, if you're working at Bojangles and people come in and get 2 or 3 biscuits and somebody pulls up and says, I need 1,000 biscuits, it takes a little bit to catch up to make sure you can do those and do them in a timely manner. So there was a little bit of lag to get started, but I believe the Spectrum personnel, and I have his name, Mr. Justin Graber, was working with our folks to try to expedite that process.
So did York Electric initially say, no, you can't do more than 25, or?
I believe it's in the documentation, sir, where it talks about how working out some of the kinks in the process. I think it was the terminology from our vice president of engineering. And I know they had multiple meetings, and Spectrum has what's called a business as usual group that does these all throughout the, you know, not a big project, but they continually expand fiber. And our folks have a very good relationship working with those folks, and very cordial.
Well, I don't need to ask the next question then. I can say this, conflict resolution relative to damage, who did what, when, and why, is not unique to electric cooperatives. In the email, I think that Attorney Warner was going over, it just caught my attention when I was looking at it, I guess relative to a specific case, I guess some laterals or something, or, yeah, I felt like deja vu all over again, you know, when I was listening to some of that stuff, because kind of had similar experiences. But that said, it seemed like York Electric or someone was accused of extortion or something else in the email, and I thought that was.
I do recall seeing that word.
I think it was on the.
It's in that email. I don't recall what line.
Well, in any event, I must be honest. When I kind of read the email, and got the sequence right, hindsight being 2020, we would all be wealthy, wise, and probably healthier. But there did seem to be a few things that I think even York could have done that would have simplified that significantly, include a picture or.
Sure.
And it did say that the individual, I can't remember the lady's name.
Monica?
Yeah, wanted to meet at the site, but was told no, and that was kind of odd. Any idea why that was?
No, that's the first I've heard of that. Our folks are usually very willing to meet folks. Like I said, the relationship we have with the Spectrum people locally is very good, and they work together well. We meet every day with Locates for the show Locate, another company where Underground is, or so I will definitely check in on that tomorrow, but I don't have an answer. That was a surprise to me, and it's kind of unfortunate wording.
Well, anything positive that comes from bad's good, right?
Yes, sir.
A couple of more questions, and I'll finish. When I'm thinking in terms of the poles, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the typical utility pole life 30 years, or I heard 45? What is a typical utility pole life?
We've had some that have been 60 some years, but well north of 30 years, unless something unusual occurs. So let's use 45 for a round number.
Do you depreciate those?
We do. I think the depreciation is over 30 years or 35 years.
Well, when this agreement started, say 2004,
Okay.
let's say 2002, because that's even numbers. And a pole was put in that year. It's 20 years. And let's say whether it's Charter, Spectrum, AT&T, whomever, I think, I can't remember the phrase y'all used, the calls or pays or who, they require something that's going to require a pole change. Is that considered the depreciated value of that, or let's say it's near its end of life? Would the communication company be expected to replace the pole that at its end of life?
I believe the contract allows for us to recoup the full replacement cost of the pole. There have been situations where if we need to do some upgrades on that same pole line, then we would have lessened the amount to account for any upgrades we make while we're there. Sometimes if we're already changing a pole, we may want to change out a wire or a cross arm. We would bear those costs, any associated upgrade costs.
And finally, as far as the poles in question, whatever those poles are, I don't know if it's every single pole that York Electric owns, or are we only talking about the poles that are in the unserved areas, or the poles that are in the more densely populated areas?
I think I understand your question. The issue of the clearances, the 84 inches and the 18 feet, I believe that is anywhere Spectrum currently or plans to attach to our poles. That's that question. And the other is, I believe you're talking about the area where we're doing the joint project with Comporium, and there may be some overlap of those two.
Well, this probably won't be a question for you. This will be probably for Spectrum then. But if I'm understanding this correctly, then what I'm hearing is you currently have an agreement or are in the process of negotiating agreement with the existing standard that goes back to 2000, 2002, 2004, correct?
Correct. We have a standing agreement with all those companies.
And there's been no issue.
Not until recently, yes, sir.
And the issue now is because the BAA, I guess, or because of this legislation?
I can't speak to what the genesis of them raising this concern is. That's a question for them. I don't know. But we've not had any complaints about the clearance issues or requirements that we put in the contract in 2002, 2003, 2004 until this case came up.
So it's not just in this small defined area that's unserved, it's every pole in every service area.
Right.
Good enough. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner Carolyn Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belser. Hello again.
Hello.
I feel like you and Commissioner Caston started a story that I wanted to hear the end of. And that was, let's say a poll went in 20 years ago in 2002. And let's say there was a need to establish, that there was a need for a new poll for whatever reason. What would be the process for determining the make-ready cost for that poll?
Well, I'll take you down two roads quickly. If the pole just needed to be replaced, it rotted or was hit by a car, then there's no cost to the cable company to do that. That's purely our cost. If the pole's being changed to make room, that's a different situation. And then that cost is borne by the company who's requesting the attachment.
With any regard to value that's been depreciated?
It's a fair question. The contract does not give a depreciated value. It covers the full cost of replacing the poles. I guess part of that reasoning was, and like I said, it's been 20 years, but was if the pole's going to be good for 45 years and it's depreciated 30, we weren't going to change it for a while. Why should our members bear the cost of putting a new pole in when the other pole is satisfactory? Did I answer your question?
You do not use any kind of depreciation in the calculation for the new pole, correct?
Our present contract does not, no.
Okay. Okay. So you have these contracts that you entered into between 2002 and 2004 that required the 84 inches as well as the 18-foot clearance requirement. Is there an estimate, and perhaps this has been asked before, is there an estimate for the number of poles that have been installed as a result of those agreements?
I think you're saying, do we know how many poles have had to be changed out because of the agreement?
Thank you.
Since 2002, no. I think it's been attested by one of the witnesses that cable installation, has gone spurts, and it's been slower. Now it's picking up in the last couple of years with some of the grant money. It'd be very hard for me to give you an estimate, ma'am. I apologize, but we will probably say 30, 40 a year, maybe if you average out the last 20 years, change outs for attachments.
In order to install the taller
Yes, ma'am.
40-foot poles?
Or 45, whatever.
Or 45. 30 to 40 a year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Across our whole system.
Okay.
And we have like 70,000 poles.
I appreciate the context.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions.
Commissioner Justin Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. Sometimes we ask the same questions in a different way.
Sure.
And I just want to make sure that I understand your answers to Commissioner Caston's question. Regarding the access to the pole provided to Comporium through their use of your line in the electric space, if Spectrum wanted to access the pole in the same manner, wherever they plan to offer broadband, you're saying that they could do that?
Let me clarify. We would have, when the contract was done with Comporium, we wanted anybody who would try to work with us on it. But the contract with Comporium is exclusive to Comporium at this point. I think my comments were that at the time before we signed an agreement with Comporium, we were open to working with anybody who would try to, in a fair manner, to get an internet service to this area that didn't have service. But once the contract was signed, that precluded anybody else from having the same agreement.
Right, and so I think I understand what you're saying, but it seems as if there's been some distinction between the small area that Comporium is providing broadband to your owners, your customers. That's been distinguished against what Spectrum wants to do and where they want to go in terms of service. Is that correct?
I believe Spectrum is looking at areas probably including but also beyond that small area that you refer to. So their request to attach poles is broader and covers more area than the small area we're working on now.
Okay. So let's take that small area and set it on the shelf. And the area beyond is the same access that Comporium has to provide broadband available to Spectrum, or is that like exclusive rights? Just that not necessarily the same access in the area, but the same access anywhere is only exclusively allowed for Comporium.
I'm gonna restate your question and see if I'm understanding. Basically, an area outside that small area we set aside, would York be willing to have a contract with Spectrum similar to that with Comporium? Is that your statement?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I don't care about the substance of the contract.
Okay.
I'm more focused on the access, the means to access the pole and provide the broadband. Would using your line or a line that they purchase in that electric space, that method of access, as opposed to the 84-inch requirement, is that available to Spectrum?
I believe in that small area we cannot, but anywhere outside that, we'd be very open to work with them to develop a contract to do something similar if that would something that would benefit our members and the Spectrum himself. So we're open to that. Glad to talk to them.
Okay, and so, and this, again, this may have been asked already, but just want to make sure we ask all the appropriate questions before we let you go. Is Comporium a broadband affiliate? Is Comporium York's broadband affiliate?
No.
Okay, how would you describe that relationship?
Wow, good question. Maybe a business partner of trying to work together to accomplish a common goal, but not an affiliate. They are what's called our ISP, Internet Service Provider. I think that's referred to in the BAA. So they're the Internet Service Provider. We're only that middle mile fiber provider. So they're not an affiliate. And I think that was addressed by some of the correspondence with attorneys between the two parties.
Okay. And from your understanding, what would have to change with the relationship in order for them to become an affiliate?
I'm not sure what affiliate means under the BAA. I'd have to kind of know that to answer that question. I know that term is in there, but I don't know what would have to happen to qualify them or us as an affiliate.
Okay. And I believe this has been asked, but just for good measure, does York intend to own the lines that they've given Comporium access to provide broadband in perpetuity?
We would rather not. Again, we have no desire to be in the communication business. Our sole purpose is electric service, but we also saw this as a need to take care of the members. So yes, if the point came that if Comporium wanted to pay back what we put into it, we'd be glad to work with them on that to come out of this business.
And do you know whether or not Comporium has any relationship with any other electric cooperative?
Similar to this, you mean?
Just in general,
They have
whatever
joint,
you know.
They have joint pole attachment agreements with other cooperatives, but I don't know of anything of this nature. Beyond that, I don't know of any contracts at all.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you,
And by
sir.
the way, some of these folks up here are from rural areas, like I am. I appreciate what the electric cooperatives do. I grew up in Wagner, and we're served by Aiken Electric Cooperative, and we recently got broadband through Aiken Electric Cooperative, and my wife is more willing to visit my family down there now because of that.
I'm glad we could help.
And so it's not taking lightly what the electric cooperatives do, and not only in terms of providing service, but also in the community. I was able to go to Washington, D.C. on that.
Washington Youth Tour.
Exactly. So
Great.
very familiar, appreciate it. You know, this BAA has brought you all into our jurisdiction, and we're just trying to figure, for this limited purpose at least, so we're trying to figure all this out. So thank you for
Thank you. And I'm
entertaining
glad-
our questions.
And I'm glad you enjoyed the Washington Youth Tour. That's a great experience.
I had an awesome time and learned a lot. Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just echo a little bit of what Commissioner Justin Williams just said. What you all do is amazing, and just reading that you were formed in 1941 made me think about a couple of things. I mean, you were formed at the beginning of World War II, and I assume that all of what was going on then made it difficult for the co-op to take care of business, get started.
Copper wire and everything.
Yeah, people and everything. And then that made me think, well, you probably a lot of these people that you all serve actually received electric service not too terribly long before I was born. I'm that old. And, I just take it for granted that everybody's always had electricity, but that wasn't the case. And basically, I think that the BAA is trying to do the same thing with broadband at a high level. So that's just editorial comments.
Thank you for your kind words.
But so I'm reading the definition of broadband affiliate in the law, and this is 58.9.3010, and this is subparagraph number 2. It says broadband affiliate means a broadband service provider that is a separate legal entity from any electric cooperative, but is wholly or partially owned by one or more electric cooperatives, or is controlled by, controls, or is under the control with one or more electric cooperatives. So that's the definition. And so having heard that read, would you agree that Comporium does not fall under the definition of broadband affiliate?
That's correct. Hearing the definition, Mr. Williams spoke of Aiken. Aiken has gone into putting fiber in. They're doing the whole service with another co-op group to, they're providing the service to the home and everything else, whereas we're just providing that middle mile of fiber. So I would agree with your characterization.
Okay, thank you. And I'm trying to kind of get my head around the timing of all of this stuff. And so the BAA was passed the very, very end of September of 2020. And it looks to me like you entered into the agreement with Comporium. I think it's the end of December of 2020. So basically approximately 3 months after this act was passed, you all entered into the agreement with Comporium. And as you have previously said, you were trying to work with others, any and everybody, to try to get this service to your customers. And then the other part of it, and I don't know the timing of this, but a lot of federal funding became available. And I think that was probably after the Broadband Accessibility Act. I'm not sure, I could be wrong about that. But we had to approve people that were qualified to get those funds. And it was a long list of people that came in and applied. And again, I don't remember who all was on that list. It may or may not have been AT&T. It may or may not have been Charter. But a lot of people came in to be approved for getting that money. So I guess, the end result is all of a sudden a lot of money became available, so it made it much more cost effective for some of these people that previously were not interested in working with you to now be very interested in working on this. So I guess I'm just wondering, do you know anything about the timing of the RDOF funds becoming available?
I don't know the dates of RDOF, but I think you're correct that it fell in about that same time frame. York Electric did not receive any RDOF funds to put fiber out when that was offered.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you.
Commissioner Caston?
It's afternoon now.
Good afternoon.
Actually, Commissioner J. Williams and C. Williams generated a question or two, and I want to make sure that I understand it or it's clear. So inside that small unserved area is the special agreement that York has with Comporium.
That's correct.
Outside of that area, and I don't know if AT&T, Spectrum, Comporium have lines on your poles outside of that area. I don't know.
They do.
Do they all have to abide by the same rules and standards outside of that area.
Yes, all those attachment agreements that are dated back, like we said, 20 years ago, all require the same requirements. So if outside that area, if Comporium's attaching their own facilities to our poles, they have to abide by the same rules as a Spectrum or a Charter or DukeNet or 3C is another company I think we do some work with. So all those have to abide by the same rules.
So absolutely nothing has changed that nothing has changed other than this, I guess, disagreement on this small unserved area.
That's correct, sir.
And you would have negotiated with any of those other entities, any of those other communication companies, just as you did with Comporium.
We've been willing to, yes, sir.
Did you attempt to?
Yes, we contacted the local folks for several companies and asked them if they could find a way to help make this happen. And, you know, respectfully, they have a business case to make, and they chose not to. We respect that totally.
I get it. Another thing that came to mind, you know, I guess thinking about the question that Commissioner Carol Lee Williams was asking you relative to the, you know, age of the pole, depreciated value, or whatever. And I was thinking about if a 30-year-old pole and Spectrum does something that it has to be upgraded to a new pole, but you also have AT&T attached to it and whomever else. Do they share that cost, or do they pick up the cost and anyone else who wants attached to it benefits? I mean, is that just kind of the way it works?
Whoever requests the change bears the cost, and then the only change, let's say that Spectrum requested it and AT&T was already there, then AT&T's only responsibility was to move their attachment from the old pole to the new pole.
And if a new communication provider came in 90 days later, after the pole's been set, they just simply benefit from the fact that you're 90 days late.
They could, as long as there was enough room for them, yes.
All right, thank you. No more questions.
Commissioners, anything further? Mr. Ellaby?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll come around. Confer very briefly with. Hello again, Mr. Basher.
Good afternoon.
Do you have Exhibit 6 in front of you? That was the email exchange about the Bent Creek incident. You would have been, may I borrow the one the court reporter has?
Get there quick. Okay, I know what you're talking about right now. I was looking for EPB 6. I apologize.
This commission has a rather confusing approach to marking exhibits. They have one number when they're pre-filed and then another number. So it can be confusing. All right, do you have the hearing Exhibit 6?
I do.
Now,
I do.
if you would turn, and this is two-sided, but I need you to turn to 1, 2, 3, 4 pages in. It's the back side.
Okay.
And this is an email from Monica Hambright. Do you see that?
I do. It's to a Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Madam Chair, is it okay if Mr. Ellaby puts that on the Elmo?
I'll plan to do that when I get to,
Thank you, sir.
the witness oriented to where I want to ask him about. Okay. That. Can you see that? Should I zoom in? I'm trying to zoom in on the paragraph I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
Do you see this paragraph in the email from Ms. Hambright?
I do.
Can you read the last two sentences of that paragraph?
You want me to start as you can see below?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's where I want you to
As you can
start.
see below, they have denied responsibility and are placing the blame on the locate company. I have attached the locate tickets to show that the locates were called in after damages were done. I submitted these to MetroTech as well, but they still deny responsibility.
Okay. Now, what I wanted to do was to clarify, what is, when the reference, are you familiar with the South Carolina Underground Utility Damage Prevention Act?
Yes.
Is that the SC 811 system?
Correct, sir.
And does that allow people to call in before they dig, call before you dig?
Right. I think you're supposed to call 3 business days before you dig.
And when Ms. Hambright, and I know I'm leading, but I'm trying to move along. Is the term locate referring to the call before you dig?
When you call in for a locate, yes.
Is that calling before you dig under that?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
I'll give your exhibit back to you.
And that related to the Bent Creek damage claim that we've had gone back and forth about.
That's correct.
One thing to follow up on, the discussion about the agreement with Comporium by which York puts fiber up and then allows Comporium to put its signals through that fiber, the middle mile contract. If that's done, as you're talking about, that project is completed and another one of your attachers wanted to attach to those very same poles that those lines were on, would that be permissible under the agreements, the pole attachment agreements that you have in place?
Definitely.
What would be the effect of York's having those lines in the electric space be on the amount of room that would be available on the pole for somebody else to attach?
It would create more space. It could possibly allow for them to not have to change a pole out.
So bear with me. Is it your understanding that under the agreement, the middle mile agreement, are the lines, the fiber, are there fiber lines that go from to the service drops?
They are, yes.
And are the service drops provided by Comporium?
They are.
And you mentioned the electronics. Is that also provided by Comporium?
It is.
Okay. And is that what's in those little pedestals that are typically mounted on the ground?
Right. I think there was a picture that showed one.
Okay. And those are, the Comporium provides the electronics?
They own and maintain.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Bassett. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I be permitted some limited recross?
I was getting ready to call on you, Mr. Werner.
Thank you. I will be brief.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again.
Good afternoon.
The commissioners asked you a few questions about pole replacements. Do you recall those questions?
I do.
Now, you testified, I believe, that in certain instances where a pole is rotted or damaged, that York would incur the cost to replace that, not Charter. But I want to focus your attention on circumstances where a pole needs to be changed out and replaced because another attacher, a communications attacher, needs to because there's not enough room for a communications attacher on the existing pole, okay? In those circumstances, we can agree that the attacher would pay the full cost to replace the pole, right?
Per the contract, that's correct.
Okay, so where there's not enough room to accommodate a Charter attachment on an existing pole, it would be on Charter to pay to replace that pole, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, York would own that pole, right?
That's correct.
And I believe in some discussion earlier, you confirmed that York would depreciate that pole,
Yes.
right? So it would take the benefit of depreciating that pole over approximately 30 years, is that right?
Right, but being nonprofit, it's not a tax benefit. It's a non-cash entry on our balance sheet.
Sure, but it would inure to the benefit of the members, is that right?
In some way, I guess, yeah.
Sure. Okay, and Charter would pay rent on that pole annually, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, there were some questions from the commissioners around the Comporium agreement. I want to circle back to that. And we had looked earlier, and I'm going to put it back up on the Elmo here, which is your Exhibit 12, which is the summary of that agreement. Now, I believe I heard you say that Comporium is only serving a limited area within York's service territory. Is that your testimony?
To clarify, with our fiber, they're serving a lot of people in our service territory.
Okay.
But I'm talking about with our fiber, it's a limited area.
Sure, but we were talking about the agreement, the network agreement between York and Comporium, right? And we haven't seen that agreement. We can agree, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so we don't know exactly what it says, right? We're relying on you, right?
Okay.
Okay. Now, in the summary of that agreement, it says that York will construct fiber primarily within its electric service territory and in other adjacent areas. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, it also says that the fiber can be used for serving customers at retail within York's electric service territory and other agreed to areas, right?
Okay.
Well, is that the agreement? Is that the deal?
I believe the reason that was in there, and I don't recall the exact contract language, that if there were some adjacent Duke Power customers, and I think within a number of feet away that did not have service, that we could use that to get them service. That was kind of gave a little bit of room to go slightly outside if we had a situation. But we have not. I think we've only served one Duke customer so far.
Yeah, my point is, pursuant to the network agreement, there is no provision in there that actually limits Comporium to serving any subset of York's service territory, right?
Madam Chair, I'm going to renew my objection on getting into the terms of the agreement. The frustrating part about this is council knows how to get access to it through the Broadband Accessibility Act. They were advised in correspondence that we've now seen as exhibits attached to testimony here. They haven't followed that, so they're trying to make the agreement look like some boogeyman that it's not. But I have to renew my objection about going down this line of questioning on that exhibit.
With respect, I'm asking the witness about his own exhibit.
I join in the objection. He's asking beyond that exhibit. He's asking now for what are the terms of the contract And Mr. Wright is exactly correct. There is a statutory process for getting access to that, and Mr. Warner knows that.
He definitely just went beyond the terms
Just-
of the, or beyond. the-
Let's limit to the terms of the email that's in evidence, please.
Okay. There's nothing in that email that suggests that Comporium can only serve certain customers within York's service territory, correct?
No, I would agree.
Okay, all right. Now, am I correct that York did not apply for any RDOF funds?
We started the process, and then once we realized that it was going to require us to go well beyond our service territory and serve Duke customers, we withdrew our application before the deadline.
So the answer to my question is yes, York did not apply for any RDOF
That's
funds?
correct.
Okay, all right. Now, we talked about these photos that Mr. Lupino had submitted in connection with his rebuttal testimony. You recall that in our discussion earlier?
I do.
Okay. Now, I want to show you a couple of these. All right, can you see that all right? Now, this pole here, where York's neutral is at 23 feet and Comporium's attachment is at 19.1, there's 48 inches of separation there, right?
But that's not a Comporium attachment.
Okay, York's attachment for Comporium.
Well, York's attachment.
Okay,
yes.
York's fiber attachment.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you'd agree with me that that's within the communications worker safety zone, right?
The 40, you're talking about the 48 inches?
Yes, sir.
With, it's, 40 inches would be, yes.
Right, it's below the communications, right?
Mhm.
So you'd agree with me that that attachment right there would not create more space for Charter to make a new attachment, would it?
In that case, it would not.
No. If Charter wanted to attach that pole, it would have to change it out, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Let's take a look at another one. All right. Now this pole here, York's neutral's at 27.9, Comporium's attachment's at 23.10, and the separation's 47 inches, right?
That's correct.
And again, that attachment's outside the communications worker safety zone, right?
That's correct.
And that's another instance where if Charter wanted to attach, it would have to change the pole, right?
I'm not familiar with, what's the spacing requirement between two communication attachments?
Sadly, I'm not an NESC expert, but
Okay.
I believe it's 12 inches.
Okay, so yes, but your answer to your question is correct.
Right. Right, and so having York attach the fiber at that height is not an instance where York is actually creating more space for other communications attachers to attach, right?
You're correct. There are
Right.
situations that you're correct.
It would force them to incur substantial make ready and change out a pole, right?
It could, yes, sir.
And here's another photo. York's at 27.8, Comporium's at 24.4 with a 40-inch separation. Now that attachment there would be right at the communications worker safety zone, right?
That's correct.
So absent York's 84-inch requirement for Charter, that's somewhere where Charter could attach, right?
A chart could.
Okay, but this is, as you said, a York attachment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and again, attaching at that height means that if Charter wanted to attach, it would have to change out that pole, right?
It would reduce the space, yes.
Okay. And there are more instances, I could go on, there are more instances in
I'm
these
sure.
photos, right? Okay. No further questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. All right, sir.
Nothing.
No, not you. Mr. Wright.
Mr. Basha.
Good afternoon.
Just a couple of questions. I'll be brief. Mr. Warner highlighted in this summary of the agreement issue.
Mr. Wright, please kind of get closer to that or pull that microphone. It's on.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. Warner highlighted in the summary of the agreement issue that that it has this provision. Hang on, let me find it again. for serving customers at retail within York's electric service territory and other agreed-to areas. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Under the Broadband Accessibility Act, do you recall the exact service area that electric cooperatives are allowed to serve?
I believe we can go within 2 miles. Is that correct? If I remember my reading correctly.
Is your recollection that you can serve your entire electric co-op service territory plus an area 2 miles outside of that territory?
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Is it possible that you could go serve an unserved customer 2 miles, up to 2 miles outside of that service territory?
That's my understanding.
Another question, about how many members does York Electric Cooperative have?
We serve about 68,000 meters.
Wow, okay. And you said the total number of customers that are in this unserved area that you're trying to reach was
Around 5,000, 4,800 and something.
well less than 10% of your
That's
total
correct.
membership. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Turner,
Thank you for the opportunity, but no, ma'am.
Mr. Huber,
Nothing from ORS, thank you.
commissioners. Mr. Basha, it looks like you're done.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience today.
Thank you.
We are about 20 to 1. Why don't we break for lunch now? Return at 2 p.m. And is it still?
Yeah, Mr. Booth has, the commission staff had checked him in, and he's been monitoring the proceedings this morning. I think he'll be ready to go.
At 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
They'll need to check in with him a little bit earlier than 2 to have him ready. So would you communicate with him, Mr. Elby?
He's probably listening to us, but I will call him to make sure.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Everybody have a good lunch. Thank you.
I am listening.
He's experienced his virtual
A
hearings.
voice from above.